I love God and hates his brother, he is a liar. For he who does not love his brother, whom he has seen, cannot love God, whom he has not seen. And this is the commandment that we have from him. Whoever loves God must love his brother. So you can't separate this. You cannot love God without loving people. You cannot love people without loving God. The two are inseparably linked. And we make a big, big mistake when we think we can do one without the other. Maybe we know that in our hearts, but with our actions and with our lives, we try and do one without the other. Verse 28, Jesus says, "You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live." Jesus affirms his response here. He says, yes, you're correct. Yes, this is how you get eternal life. And there was another encounter that's similar to this. In Matthew 22, verses 34 through 40, it says, "But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him." So it's a very similar situation. And he says, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And Jesus says to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And the second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets." Now it's really key to this lesson, to this parable, that we understand this. That these are the two greatest commandments. These are the two that matter most. These are the two that truly, truly matter to God and that you truly need to keep. And the Pharisees know this. The teachers of the law know this. This lawyer who comes to Jesus knows this. That the greatest commandment is to love God with everything you have, and the second commandment is to love your neighbor. Because what we're going to see in this story is that they forsake the greatest commandments. Is that people oftentimes do not follow those commandments and think they are justified because they follow other commandments, while the whole time they are ignoring the two greatest. Verse 29. "But he, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, 'And who is my neighbor?'" So he wants to look good. He wants to think, okay, I'm doing really well. I'm loving God, I'm obeying the commandments, and I'm loving my neighbors as long as my neighbor is my friend, my family, Israel, just not the poor people or the sinners or the tax collectors, He wants Jesus to say, you love the people who it's easy for you to love. Because if he had said that, this lawyer would have gone away feeling good about himself. He would have been justified. He would have thought, I have it all together. I'm doing really well. But Jesus is going to completely turn the tables on him. Jesus is going to tell him something that's completely unexpected. Verse 30. "And Jesus replied, 'A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead.'" So he says this man goes down from Jerusalem to Jericho on this road. Now this is a real road, and it's a dangerous road. It was known to be a dangerous road. It was known to be a treacherous road. It's not the kind of road you would want to travel alone. It's not the kind of road you want to travel if you were weak. But this is the road this guy goes on. And now it says he's going down to Jericho. That's because Jerusalem's on a hill. It's on like a mountain. And so all through the Bible you see that people are always going down from Jerusalem. And that's because they're literally going downhill. And so he's going down this road, and these robbers, not surprisingly, jump him and beat him. And they take all he has. They strip him naked. They leave him wounded, naked, and bleeding. There by the side of the road. All alone. Helpless. Half dead. Verse 31. "Now by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side." Now, the priest would have had good reasons for doing this. Because, for a priest, there's a commandment that you cannot go near a dead body. You cannot touch a dead body. You can't even be near one. And so he passes by the other side of the road because he doesn't want to be defiled. He doesn't want to be made unclean. If he touches this dead body, or, he wouldn't have known if he was dead or not, but if it was a dead body and he touched it, he would have had to go through all the ceremonies. He would have had to offer sacrifices. He would have had to present himself to another priest. His priestly duties would have been inhibited. He would have had all this shame, all this guilt, because he was defiled. He was unclean. And so he passes by. See, he keeps one commandment, but he forsakes the two greatest. To love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, and all your mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. See, the priest thinks it's more important that I keep my, my good character. It's more important that I stay clean. It's more important that I follow all these rituals and all these ceremonies than help this guy out. And so the priest justifies it in his own mind, and he passes by him. And what's interesting about this to me is that a priest is supposed to be a mediator between God and man. He's supposed to reflect the character of God. What he reveals is that really his heart is very hard and very far from God. And see, it really doesn't matter who you are. You can be a really religious person. You can be a spiritual leader. You can even be a leader in a church. But you can have a heart that is far from God and hard and unloving. And so he passes by on the other side. And then a Levite passes by in verse 32. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. So this guy, this Levite, who would be like an assistant to the priest. The Levites were the tribe that became the priest. So he wasn't quite a priest, but he still would have followed the same ceremonies. He still wouldn't touch a dead body. But also, he would have had a whole lot less resources than the priest. He would have been, less rich. He wouldn't have had as much resources and money as the priest. And he probably thought to himself, well, if the priest wouldn't touch this man, wouldn't go near him, I certainly should not. And plus, I don't have the money that the priest has. I don't have the resources that the priest has. I don't really have what I need to help this guy. And so he passes by on the other side. And so the two people who should have reflected God's character, who should have known the two greatest commandments, passed this man by. And they failed to love God. They failed to love their neighbor. But verse 33, it says, but a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. Now, a Samaritan was a half-breed. When Israel was taken captive, some of them intermarried with their captors, and that's how the Samaritans were produced. They were the children that these Jews who married their captors had. And so they were considered unclean. They were hated. They were despised. In fact, sometimes the Jews would pray, God, I thank you that you've forgiven me, and please don't forgive the Samaritans. Or they would pray, God, I thank you that I wasn't born a Gentile, a woman, or a Samaritan. These were people who were hated. There was so much racial tension between them, to put it nicely. They despised each other. And so, as this lawyer is listening to the story, when Jesus says Samaritan, he would have automatically been thinking, oh, that stupid Samaritan. That horrible Samaritan. But then, it's interesting because Jesus says he had compassion. The Samaritan, this dirty, rotten, nasty Samaritan, had compassion on this man, when the priest and the Levite wouldn't. And I think from the Samaritan we can notice three things about loving your neighbor. Three things about love. And the first thing is that love feels something. It is an emotion. It is a feeling. Love feels something. Because it says he had compassion. The word that's used here is really interesting. It would literally mean he felt compassion in his bowels.